I'm trying to romance him. I'm trying to get Michael to come over to our side.
I was at a conference last fall, and one of there were two leading mathematicians there, one from Oxford, John Lennox, whose name I can share in this context, who told me that the other mathematician there was 2 league tables above him in the hierarchy of great mathematicians, one of the top 3 guys in the world, maybe.
Wow. And
anyway, this other mathematician, whose name I'm not going to reveal yet, but can in a year or so when he comes out with a book that we're going to be publishing, he took me aside and said, I love your new book, Return of the God Hypothesis. He said, my wife's an agnostic, but after reading it, she's going wobbly. He said,
"Wow!"
But he said, "I have a beef with you." He said, "You got 3 the 3 discoveries that reveal the mind behind the universe." He says, "There's one more. It's math." And I had just read a long essay that he had written, and I kind of knew where he was going with this. But he starts to explain. He says, all mathematicians are basically mathematical Platonists. They believe mathematical structures, equations, mathematical objects, as the mathematicians call them, circles, geometric forms, have an objective reality. A circle has all the same properties to every geometer, irrespective of their preference. We're not
language,
relativists.
their location on the earth.
The quadratic equation or differential equations, they have certain properties, and they are stable, and they are mind independent. And yet they are independent of our perceptions, but they are conceptual. They are not physical, they are not material. So they're objective, they're conceptual, but they do not. But mathematicians believe they are discovered, not invented.
They're
because they have a reality independent of ours. Well, if they're
that's one of the great ideas of philosophy, Pythagorean theorem: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That reality exists, whether you're here or not. Whether the firmament is here, it doesn't matter. That's a reality.
So if they're conceptual, meaning mental, and they're not, and they're independent of our perceptions, in whose mind do they exist? And this mathematician, writing a book on this with our colleague David Berlinski, says this seems to point
deep shit
towards an immaterial mind, towards theism. And so
Michael,
you missed.
That's a number 3 mathematician in the world,
missed something,
Michael.
Meyer. He said it should be four things that reveal the mind.
That's so cool, though. What an endorsement.
Let's see what numbers 1 and 2 think of that.
Son of a bitch. He had to get the number 1 and number 2.
Well, because but again, how does science work? It's very much a collective social enterprise of trying to convince your colleagues that you've got something worth listening to and that you have evidence for it.
Sure.
And if you don't, well, that's just the way it goes. I mean, I get letters all the time from people that, that they have an alternative theory of physics too. There's hundreds of them. But most of them.
This isn't an alternative theory of math. This is a question,
I understand.
This is a question of the philosophy of
yes,
mathematics.
Of course, yeah.
And it happens that most mathematicians are mathematical Platonists. They recognize this objectivity and immateriality of mathematical objects, and that raises a question. If something's conceptual, in which mind does it reside if it doesn't reside in ours?
In the template in the sky, and that would be God.
Well, okay, so
that would be Yahweh.
I mean, so take some basic laws of nature, like when a star gets to a certain temperature, it fuses hydrogen into helium, and you can describe this with math. All right, but where is that description? I mean, where's the math existing? I mean, it's not in the star; it's where? I mean, it's in somebody's mind describing, but the process is actually happening. It's out there.
It's separate from us, isn't it?
But we use words to describe it, or we have equations to describe it. Where are those? This is a hard problem.
It's a great question, and it's one of the reasons that I think quantum cosmology, the alternative to a straight-up Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God, has its own theistic implications. Quantum cosmology does, because the explanans, the thing doing the explaining in quantum cosmology, is a mathematical function called a universal wave function, and an apparatus that stands behind that called the Wheeler-DeWitt equation and superspace. There's this whole mathematical apparatus that pre-exists the universe, the physical universe, and the physical universe is explained as a consequence of the mathematics that pre-exists the universe. Now, people, the guys at the forefront of this, not the popularizers, but people like Vilenkin, have said, wait a minute, doesn't that imply then, aren't we then saying, maybe we don't want to be saying this, maybe inadvertently we're saying this, but doesn't that imply that there's a mind behind the universe? And Hawking himself tumbled to the this uncomfortable realization. He said, what is it that puts fire in the equations that gives them a universe to describe? And what he's saying, he's building off of what Michael just said, is that math by itself has it's causally inert. It doesn't, it's
just there.
Conceptual. It's not a physical thing that causes other physical things to happen.
Yes, it is, though.
So,
but I mean, there are theoretical theorems that later on, so somebody writes somebody dedicates his life to a theorem, they die at 85, 100 years later, somebody pulls that off the shelf use to measure X, Y, and Z.
This mathematician that I was talking about,
I mean, that's incredible.
This is what his essay was about: is this the unreasonable applicability of mathematics to the physical world. Quantum mechanics was developed. The mathematics of complex variables was developed long before it had any application on the basis of pure deductions, mathematical deductions from first principles. And then 100 years later, it turns out to be absolutely critical to doing quantum mechanics. And there are many, many examples of this in the history of physics. What is it that why does John Polkinghorne, the great Cambridge physicist, used to say, why does the reason within the mathematics that we develop on the basis of our deductive reasoning match and describe precisely the reason that is built into the universe, the design of the universe? And he says the best explanation for that is, again, theism. It provides a principle of correspondence, that the same God who made the design, the rationality, the orderly patterns we see in nature, made our minds in such a way to discern the mathematical structure that is inherent in those systems, and that's why we can do science. And actually, that principle of correspondence was one of the key things that inspired the scientific revolution. It was called the principle of intelligibility. And all the great theists who were the early founders of modern science, Boyle, Kepler, Newton, believed that nature was intelligible and could be understood by the human mind because the design in nature issued from the same intelligence, namely God, who made our minds
in his likeness,
so that we could understand nature.
It's a hell of an argument. I mean,
although I should point out since I
can
mentioned
feel Michael's skepticism.
You mentioned Max Tegmark before. He deals with the same problems and does not come to the theistic conclusion at all.
Well, he's always got to bring the spoil sport into the party.
Well, what Tegmark does is says that every mathematical structure that's logically possible must exist in some possible world. And
I'm not. But my point was this: I'm not.
And
sure
Michael and I are both skeptical about that.
I don't know.
That does nothing to undermine
the point is that
argument.
It's not necessarily the right induction to the best explanation. Theism. I mean, it could be that we're just going to hit an epistemological wall where we just can't know, like what was there before the Big Bang, what was there before time began. Again, Hawking's analogy: what's north of the North Pole? How does something come from nothing? Well, what do you mean by nothing? Well, not only just no matter, space, time, energy, but no logic, no ideas, no gods, nothing. No eternity.
No laws of physics, Lawrence Krauss. Sorry, you're cheating.
Nothing. Nothing. I mean, you wouldn't even have no thing. I mean, the word itself, no thing, implies there's a thing that doesn't exist. True nothing wouldn't even be that. There's no eternity because there's no time. At some point, I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Right.
These words are just like, well,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I think for what it's worth, you make a hell of an argument to me. I've been romanced.
Damn, I was going to get you some flowers.
Michael still
take you out to dinner.
He still holds firm. I know. I'm a soft touch.
It's always a great iron sharpening iron conversation with Michael.